Hey fearsome friends. We've all had those horrifying hotel experiences. Suspicious stains on the decor, dead bugs and funny smells. These stories will take you back to these times and introduce you to new possible hotel horrors. So sit back and relax and get cozy, comfy, warm, 'cause it's time to let your nightmares in. My husband and I treated ourselves to a night at Radisson Blu in downtown Chicago. We don't get to do things like that usually, so it was awesome. The rates were very inexpensive, and there were certain things you had no access to, room service and the minibar, but we didn't care. Since there wasn't room service, we ordered off Uber Eats. Nothing fancy, just potbellies. It was 10 p.m. and I went downstairs to wait for the food and smoke a cigarette. I went around to the side, but was still near the front, and there wasn't anyone around. The food arrived, but I stayed to finish smoking. Still stood around the side of the entrance, when suddenly, a really well-dressed guy, who was wearing a camo mask, walked up and asked me for a cigarette. Now normally it's not an issue, but he seemed a bit off. I can't explain it, except to say that as soon as he asked me, I felt like something was wrong. His voice sounded uneasy. As I passed him the cigarette, he got really close to me, and that's when it started to get scary. He asked for some food. I felt bad, but it wasn't possible to give him any. It was just 2 sandwiches. I said I was sorry, but it was for my husband and I figured he'd leave and I could finish smoking. However, instead he walked up so close he was against the food bag, and I was against the other side, almost pressing the glass. Then he asked for some of the food again. I said no and I was really sorry, but he insisted I could, but was lying. He was getting angry now, but he wasn't yelling so as to not attract attention. It continued like that for a few minutes. Then he asked to use my lighter. I gave it to him, and he started in on how I was lying again. He insisted I could give him food. Then he asked if I worked there, not a specific place, and I said I was staying at the hotel. I was really nervous. He asked where I was staying, and I asked why. He said because there were a lot of hotels in the area. I pointed at the hotel behind me, and I don't know why, but I was really anxious by this point. This whole interaction so far was scary, and I usually have no issue dealing with people. However, he was getting pushier and angrier. He then said, "So you're staying here?" I said yes. During this entire time, he kept saying I was lying about the food and started getting closer and closer to me as I backed up. He kept angrily insisting I could give him food, but didn't want to. And I said, "No, I am sorry, I can't." We were already too close for comfort and beyond a safe distance, and he was pressing against the bag I was holding against my chest. His face was inches from mine. He then said, "So you're here with your boyfriend?" I corrected him and said husband. Then he checked my hand for a ring. I started walking backwards to the back door, which was about 50 feet away. I thought that so long as I didn't act afraid, it would turn out okay. But I was afraid. His cigarette was lit and he was still holding my lighter. People usually give it back at this point. He continued demanding some of the food, so I felt it was time to be more assertive. I demanded my lighter back and he started getting angry at me, saying over and over that I could give him some food. He then gave my lighter back, but then grabbed both of my arms. I was terrified and began banging on the glass door with my elbow to get the receptionist's attention, but she ignored me. He got pissed and said something, but I was so scared, I wasn't paying attention. I just wanted help. If anyone reading this knew me, they'd know I'd never bang on a window yelling help, unless I felt absolutely terrified. I started crying at this point, because I was alone on a side street at night, and no one could help me. I had no thoughts other than to just get away. I wasn't thinking he'd hurt me in a specific way. I just felt danger and needed to run. That's how scared I was. He got angry that I was crying and pulled me closer. When just then, something happened that changed everything, and I'm so grateful. My mum called. I had my earbuds in, which he couldn't see because my hood was up on my coat. So I pressed answer and started crying hysterically, and almost screaming. "He's trying to attack me! He's trying to attack me!" That seemed to anger him more, because he tightened his grip for a second. But it also startled him and he let go. So I ran to the doors while still crying and shaking, and I cried all the way back to the room. My mum comforted me on the phone and told me not to go outside again. My husband was so comforting and sweet, and just held me, and then he wanted to know everything. I had to relay it a few times because I was still crying and couldn't breathe. Plus, I was talking too fast. I saw the guy again around 1 a.m., as I was standing in front of the hotel by those tall ashtray things they have outside restaurants and hotels. I then went inside and saw him through the glass where he'd assaulted me. I don't know if he was waiting for me or what, but it terrified me. That same night, another person asked me for a cigarette, but this time it was a really nice woman. She thanked me, but she could tell I was upset about something. She asked me if I was okay, and I told her. She sympathized and explained that's why she always carried a very small handgun which was in her purse. I'm definitely getting maced, so this doesn't happen again. I was staying the night in Mexico City after doing some paperwork in the German embassy there. The plan was to take a tour through the city and go to a theatre at night. At around 4 p.m, we, myself, my wife and my 9-year-old daughter, were feeling tired, so I suggested going to the hotel, cool down for a couple of hours, then head to the theatre feeling refreshed. I booked a really cheap hotel that had breakfast included and was only 3 kilometers away from downtown. Overall, it looked okay in the pictures, so why not? We took the subway to get there, and everything went pretty smoothly. That is, until we reached our station and got off the subway. The neighborhood was shady as hell. There was a street market filled with counterfeit goods, and it was booming. Lots of people were frantically moving in all directions, and there were lots of homeless, or at least they looked homeless, people drinking and taking drugs in the streets. Now, I am by no means scared of addicts or drugs, but the sheer amount of zombies passing by was scarring. I jumped into survival mode and walked as fast as I could, looking for the safest place to take refuge, whilst looking at my phone as to where the hell the hotel was. I didn't want us to look any more like tourists than we already did. A chain drugstore appeared in my view, so I headed over there, sprinting through this crap hole. I didn't want my wife and daughter to realize how nervous I was, but they were surely just as scared as I was. I bought a couple of water bottles in the drugstore to justify our presence there, and meanwhile checked how far our hotel was. It was around 5 blocks, and I wasn't willing to walk those streets again. There was heavy traffic everywhere, lots of buses and taxis passing by. But I didn't want to take a cab from that street, because they could just be as dangerous. I thought it was our best bet, though, and gave it a shot. Every taxi that came by was fastly taken, and we spent 5 minutes trying to get one. Eventually succeeding, I gave the address to the driver, and he told us that it was a short drive and that he knew the place. He then asked, "Have you already stayed there before?" As soon as I heard that, I realized that getting this hotel hadn't been a good choice. I said no and asked him why he wanted to know. He told me that the whole neighborhood is really dangerous, and that the hotel was basically a crack and whorehouse. He said it really wasn't a good idea for us to be there, as we stood out as tourists and would be easily targeted. Furthermore, he said that a couple of blocks away, heavy drug trafficking was dealt with 24/7. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. I knew we weren't going to stay in this place, but I was also scared the taxi driver would rip us off. I told him to just leave us at the subway station, so he did. He was a really cool guy that really saved us being robbed or worse. We decided to hang out in McDonald's until showtime, then went to the theater and took the bus back home after that. This story happened when I was around elementary school age, so some of the details might be fuzzy, as this was a long time ago. I was in a hotel and happened to be completely alone. Here's some backstory as to why I was. Our TV was hooked up to an antenna, so the channels we got were repetitive and boring. It also meant we didn't get the Macy's Day Parade. So to solve this issue, we went to a hotel relatively close by to us. Unfortunately, my mum came down with a horrible illness a day or two before, so she couldn't join us. We also got our room upgraded to one with a balcony, and this is especially important, because if the room wasn't upgraded, I don't think this would have ever happened. It occurred the day we were checking out, which was Thanksgiving. Our plan was to hang out the night before, wake up and watch the parade in the morning, then get home by the evening. It was around 8ish when the rest of my family, not including my mum, went out to run an errand that came up. I, being lazy and not wanting to get ready just yet, opted to stay at the hotel room. Before he left, my dad said to double lock the door and always check the peephole should someone strange ever show up. He even did a practice run before he left. Then in some weird twist of irony, someone started knocking on the door not even 5 minutes after they'd left. Doing what my dad had instructed, I checked the peephole. I was expecting to see my dad surprising me with another checkup, but the person I saw looked nothing like my dad. This is where my memory gets a bit fuzzy. I believe the man was very old, with grey hair that showed signs of balding. I specifically remember a small cardboard box that he was holding in his hands. I remembered thinking it was some sort of an illegal substance, even at my young age, and fear set in as I stood there, unsure of what to do. Then I remembered what my dad had said, if something like this ever happened. The man said, "Are your parents here?" "No," I said. "They're down in the lobby, but will be up soon." "Why are they down in the lobby?" he asked. At this point, I didn't know what to say, so I backed away from the door. In hindsight, I'm sure now that he'd known what my dad had told me, as it turned out that his room was right next to ours. I ended up FaceTiming my mum on my iPad, because I wasn't allowed a phone at the time. She contacted the rest of my family and said to get hotel staff on the line. I tried calling them, but they didn't pick up. Not wanting to annoy them, I didn't call again, which I know was stupid of me, but I was young and didn't know how to handle this. While all this was happening, the man began banging on my door with a new intensity and was yelling for me to let him in. Now with all of the shouting, I couldn't hear my mum, so I went out onto the balcony. But that spot didn't last. I soon went back over to the peephole to see what was going on, and there was what I believed to be a security guard trying to help the man get into my room. The weird thing is, the key he was using didn't work for my door, so there's no way it could have been a master key the staff had. Not to mention, this hotel didn't have security. It just had staff. And I don't remember him wearing a uniform. He was also gone by the time real staff got there. I walked back out onto the balcony and was freaking out at this point. That's when he went into his real room and began banging on the windows, screaming for me to let him in. Terrified, I ran into the bathroom and locked the door, and that's where my dad found me when he got back. The man's excuse was that his son, who was around 15 to 16, and his girlfriend were supposed to be staying in our room. That was blatantly untrue and was just an excuse. I didn't look old enough to be in a relationship, and he should have known that since he'd seen me. If it wasn't for my dad telling me to check the door, I would have opened it to that stranger, and with the perfect timing of his arrival and his knowledge of a young girl being alone, I have reason to believe he was stalking us. Thankfully, I'll never know that outcome. We never did upgrade our antenna, but luckily live streams became a thing. I was on the way back from New York with my dad at the time, and since it was already getting late when we left, my dad booked a cheap hotel. I think it was a Motel 6 in Pennsylvania. I don't think we were in Gettysburg, but it was a small town close by. We booked this hotel as we were already strapped on cash and needed the leftover money for gas to make it back to Michigan. We booked a non-smoking room, but the first thing we noticed was that all of the floors had smokers smoking in it. At first it wasn't that bad, but once we got into our room, that's when the horror unfolded. The ceiling was yellow from cigarette tar. There were cigarette butts all around the bed, and the smoke was so thick in the room it could gag even the hardiest of smokers. Now, I have mild asthma that rarely forces me to use an inhaler, and most of the time things don't bother my lungs. But I used my inhaler for the first time in months that night. My dad couldn't take it and said he tried to open the window for some fresh air. He pushed the bed towards the window so he'd have a seat to sit on while he tried to finagle with the window. But when the bed was pulled away from the wall, I saw dead cockroaches and a used needle surrounded by cigarette butts. It looked like the roaches were performing a ritual with the needle and butts. Unfortunately, the hotel was situated on a swampy, marshy type of land. So when my dad got the window open, the fresh air that was now wafting into our room was just putrid. It smelled like a sewer mixed with decomposition from dead animals and rotting plant matter. All that mixed with the smoke, and at that point I tapped out. We ended up leaving the hotel and sleeping in our car at a gas station parking lot. There was a small diner that we went to the next morning that seriously had the best food and cup of coffee, but I don't remember the name of it. It was right by a highway that would lead to Gettysburg from the town we were in, and the waitresses all wore this outfit that had a blue and white pattern on it that looked like those pictures of those 50s housewives. If anyone is around that area, I'd like to know what the restaurant's called so I can go back there someday. Dear Sirs, it has been some time since our last communication. It has not been an easy 1.5 years. I have been anxious and worried and emotionally distressed since the disturbing events which were inflicted upon me at your company's Marriott Hotel. You will recall the unfortunate chaos that ensued when I checked in on that night. I had to awaken your employee at the front desk, and as doing so, in her drowsy state she checked me in. Your employee gave me the wrong key to the wrong room. She, in fact, gave me the key to the room which was already occupied. It was occupied by a man and woman who were actually engaged in and having sex at the very moment when I used the provided key to enter their room. When I walked in, the man was directly behind the woman on the bed having intercourse, and the chaos and threats and aggression which ensued thereafter were terrifying, traumatic, and disturbingly shocking to me. This man screamed at me over and over, "Are you a cop?" Then he came at me from the bed in the room, naked and aroused, initially, and was yelling obscenities and threats. The woman was screaming too. This man kept yelling, and when I could finally formulate coherent words, I stammered, "No." After he heard I wasn't law enforcement, the threats and violent nature of this increased exponentially. He yelled over and over, "I'm gonna effing kill you." By this point I was shaking, scared and confused beyond words. Since he'd learned I was one of your customers, like himself, and not law enforcement, his violence increased. He followed me to my vehicle and began pounding on my window and screaming, "I have your license plate now. I know what you look like, bitch. I'm gonna find you and kill you." I sat there staring straight ahead, shaking and freaked out, while he hammered on my car and shrieked threats and obscenities. Paralyzed with fear and indecision, I honestly couldn't compose myself for what seemed like forever, prior to being able to start my car and drive off, with him threatening me the entire time. Frankly, his actions spoke volumes. The man immediately, while still on the bed, thought I was law enforcement, and when he learned that I was not a police officer, his demeanor changed drastically, and he was threatening, aggressive, and terrifyingly, repeatedly threatening me with bodily injury and death. He chased me out into the parking lot and pounded on my car and windows. He screamed he had my license plate number and knew what I looked like, so he'd find me and kill me. Obviously he was enraged in an illicit and illegal sexual encounter, and your company was passively acquiescing if not facilitating it. Due to your employee's disregard for my safety and her negligence, I was subjected to one of the most frightening events of my life. Otherwise, with a couple engaged in sexual intercourse, why would the first thing the man ask be whether or not I'm law enforcement? It seems that with the lackadaisical staff and your freeway location, your company must generate significant income of such activities. As I'm sure you are aware, the doctrine of respondent superior holds your company for the acts of your employees in these exact types of situations and causes of action. I have been in therapy since this event. One weekly session is $350 per hour. I am constantly worried for my safety, and that of my loved ones, due to no fault of my own, and directly as a result of the negligence of your staff. I have been subjected to one of the most shocking and traumatic events of my life up until that point in time. Since those events on your property, if some vehicle is behind me for more than 1 to 2 minutes, I begin to sweat and my stomach clenches involuntarily. I am literally petrified when coming up to my parked car or going into rooms at hotels. When it's night and I see headlights through my home's windows, I get anxious. Everyday mundanities have become a source of repeated stress. It may seem unreasonable, but emotions and trauma are, by their very nature, unreasonable. But this raises its ugly head every day. I am 50 years old, and I have never heard of anyone experiencing what I've experienced on your property. It is unconscionable. I believe if he had a gun, I would be dead, and he would be justified thinking I was breaking into his room. My therapist has informed me that there is no time frame on trauma, and I will work through this, if at all, over an indefinite period of time. What I experienced was extremely traumatic, and my response has been the expected one. I would rather not sue Woodbury Corporation or alert the media and social media in a predominantly LDS community as to what transpired on your property by your employees' negligence on me. I have and continue to experience severe emotional distress, anxiety, worry and fear which is ongoing and serious. It destabilizes and affects me out of the blue sometimes. It's stolen my life's peace and joy of travel. I try to avoid work travel now as much as possible, and that hurts my businesses. In light of the foregoing, coupled with the indefinite nature of my emotional distress and fallout related thereto, I hereby offer to resolve any and all claims and potential claims against your company confidentially for $65,000. This offer will remain open for 10 days. Should I not resolve these claims with you prior to then, I will move forward in a very public, litigious manner from then on. I used to travel for work, and I was attached to an out-of-town crew in another region, whose main hub was 2 hours away from the main shop, and consisted of 2 other guys. So me and sometimes another guy would travel to a region, and on this particular occasion, I was staying in a hotel that was in a different town to my normal one when with this crew. I had basically been checked in by Norman Bates. He insisted on helping with my bags, even though I refused. Just to note, I was using Army-issued duffel bags I have because of National Guard. I was too cheap to buy different duffel bags, and just used these. Checking in, he said, "These are Army bags." "Yes," I replied. I was anticipating the "thank you for your service" spiel, and was revving up the old "thank you for the support" in reply. But he caught me off guard when he suddenly asked, "Have you killed people?" "No," I said. "That's disappointing." He escorted me to my room and just stood there staring for a minute, when I eventually asked him to leave, and he did. I then locked up and went to the job site, getting back around 8 p.m. It had been a long day, and I was in no mood for weirdness. But needless to say, that's exactly what I got. Norman Bates was standing at my door as I approached. I asked if he needed something, but he just took off with a cleaning cart to a different room, which I obviously found odd. Later that night, I was drinking a beer and playing games on my phone, when my doorknob started to turn, 6 times in all. I went to confront whoever it was, but they were gone. I suspected it was Norman. Later on, once I was asleep, I'd forgotten to lock the second latch that acts as a doorstop if the staff decided to unlock the main one. I woke up in the middle of the night, and Norman was standing in the doorway. I was completely freaked out, yelling for him to get the hell out, but instead he walked in to assure the guests were okay. As he'd heard loud thuds. I pushed him out, locked the door again, and packed my stuff. I then loaded up and drove 30 minutes to sleep at a rest stop in my truck. HR called me by lunchtime, demanding to know why the mother of the kid that ran the hotel had called, asking why I pushed out her autistic son from my room after telling him my glorious war stories, which was only a half-truth. I lucked out though and didn't get in trouble, and stayed with my foreman and his family that week. His wife knew some of the family personally from high school, and I guess they're a family of creeps. They in recent years purchased and ran the hotel. So I'm just going to give you guys all the details of what just happened to me. And if you could let me know your thoughts, I would really appreciate it. My mum told me I should report it to someone, but my dad said I was being overdramatic. So here's what happened. I'm a 22-year-old female from Ohio, and I'm currently staying at a hotel with my dad in Maryland. Our hotel is connected to another one in the parking lot, which is pretty vast. One night my dad and I got into a major argument. so I left our room and went for a walk around the parking lot. This was around 11:30 p.m. and I was wearing all black. I walked over to the hotel that was next to ours, walked up a bit of an incline, then sat in this parking area that is a bit of a ways away from the hotel, but is closer to a main road. The road at that time wasn't the busiest, but was busy enough, and past the road is nothing but thick trees. I was sitting behind a shipping container or crate, not exactly sure what it was, but it was huge, way bigger than a dumpster, and my back was facing the little road that leads to the exit of the parking lot. I pulled out half of a blunt and started smoking it, then decided I was going to FaceTime my mom to talk about the fight. As I was sitting there, a truck passed, and I peeked over my shoulder to watch it exit onto the main road. I continued talking to my mom when this car, with all tinted windows, drove up from the hotel to the exit. I could hear its engine was behind me for longer than the truck had been, and when I again peeked over my shoulder, I saw it was now reversing. I thought to myself, maybe they're going back to the hotel to get something. So I carried on talking to my mom, and the car then reversed so much it parked right behind me. I was literally breathing in the exhaust. I told my mum how annoyed I was that this person could have picked anywhere to park, but chose to go right next to me. So she told me to just move. I packed up my things in my backpack and moved to the opposite corner of the parking lot. Now my back was facing the main road, and I was keeping an eye and safe distance between me and the car. I continued talking to my mum when I suddenly heard the car door loudly being slammed, to the point where it literally made me jump a few times. The car sat there for around 10 minutes, and I heard the door being slammed about 4 times. Now I watched the car carefully, but never saw anyone leave it or get into it. I couldn't even see the door opening and shutting. But I do know that if they'd gotten out and gone to the hotel, it would have been a bit of a walk, and I would have seen them going down the incline. The car then eventually started to move, but turned towards the hotel. It drove down the hill and crossed over to my hotel parking lot. I could see all their headlights and backlights turn off. Then they got onto the main road, going through my hotel's entrance, which was lower to where I was sitting. I stayed on the phone with my mom as she was kind of joking that I should go back to my hotel, but I reassured her that the car had left and I was fine. Sitting there for another 30 to 40 minutes or so, and I was keeping a close eye on every car that passed behind me on the main road, because now I was a little paranoid. I continued talking with my mom, and finally let my guard down, when all of a sudden the car entered the entrance that I was near to, and just stopped. It was just sitting there. All I said into the phone was, "Mom?" When the car began to turn and head towards me, I immediately shot up and ran as fast as I could to my hotel. I quickly checked behind me, and the car was driving down towards the hotel, and that was the last I saw of it before I got inside and got to my room. My mum told me I should report it to the front desk, but my dad told me I was overreacting. I have never had an encounter like this before, and I didn't have a bad gut feeling per se, but I definitely felt it was weird. It was midnight, and I was a girl by myself after all. Also, the car had tinted windows, so I couldn't see who was inside. Am I paranoid, or does that just seem sketchy? So I went to have a night away at the Quality Inn Riverfront in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The reviews seemed fine, and I brushed off the bad ones as maybe one-offs. I was just taken more by the location, as the hotel was on the river and walkable to restaurants. I set my standards very low, since this is a 2-star hotel. I went to check in and noticed some of the clientele seemed questionable, but there were youth soccer families there too, so I figured I would be okay. The woman at the front desk told me to check my room before I go out to explore the local restaurants. I usually don't get that line when I check into places, so I felt something was up. I complied regardless and walked through a hallway that stank of smoke. It's a non-smoking hotel, and I could also smell Indian food from the restaurant next door. I brushed it all off and thought that maybe my room would be decent. But no. I immediately noticed that there were scuff marks on the door to the left of the handle. It seemed like someone had broken into the room previously. Fine, whatever. I let myself in, and the security latch was broken in half and hanging on by the screws. I also saw that the strike plate was broken and wobbly. At least the door seemed to close and lock, although it didn't seem like it would take much effort if someone did want to get in there. The room was also very eerily quiet and dim, despite having all the lights on. I called down to the front desk to let them know about the broken lock, and they said they would send someone up to fix it. I called my spouse about it, and they said just get a refund and leave. I said I'd wait for the maintenance guy first, and if he didn't come in the next 15 minutes, I'd go. As I was waiting, I was just getting an overall bad feeling, and decided that I would get a refund and leave. I was still waiting for the guy after 20 minutes, and surprise, surprise, he didn't show up. As I went down to the front desk, I was stopped by very inquisitive housekeeping staff. They asked what was wrong with my room, why I was leaving, and what room number I was in. It seemed odd, but I just said the lock was broken and I didn't feel safe, so I was leaving. The front desk staff seemed pretty surprised when I showed them the pictures and wondered why housekeeping hadn't notified them. They issued me a refund and I hightailed it out of there. Days later, and I couldn't seem to shake this experience in my mind. From the front desk lady telling me to check my room once in there, then the housekeeping staff being nosy. It felt like some kind of setup for me to be murdered or trafficked. Maybe it wasn't, and it was just a series of unfortunate events. But something felt off, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.